Jeff Wayne in person here at the Radio Teesdale studios. He'd taken time out of his busy schedule to come in and talk to us about the War of the Worlds, a live on stage tour, which is coming to Newcastle's Metro Arena on the 2nd of December this year. I reckon every day on Radio Teesdale is a special day, but today is a very special day. I'm joined in the studio by the winner of no less than 2 Ivor Novello Awards and the recipient of many other prestigious music awards. This is Mr. War of the Worlds himself, Jeff Wayne. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Malcolm. It's lovely to be with you.
Great, and thank you very much for taking time out to come and visit Radio Teesdale and speak to us today. Now, we all know about War of the Worlds, and we're going to be talking about the new stage show, or the new improved stage show, even better still. You've been in England quite a long time, actually. In the UK, you came over. I know your family was in show business. When did you come over to Britain?
I first moved to England as I was a little boy. It was the mid-'50s, and my dad secured the role of Sky Masterson, the romantic gambler, in what was a Broadway musical called Guys and Dolls, and he played that role in the original West End production. So that was my first introduction to England. We stayed for about 4.5 years, but accumulatively, I've lived in England over 2/3 of my life. I live in the county of Hertfordshire, so I guess by the mathematics, I'm more Brit than Yank.
That's great, and of course you went back to finish your schooling in America. So how did your music career develop from there?
Well, it really started for me very early on. I started taking classical piano lessons at the age of 5. My father, having been a singer, an actor, songwriter, later on in his career, he went into theater production. But I have very strong memories of growing up in New York, surrounded by all of his friends, which are mostly other people in performance or acting, directing, and tennis players. That was his main sport. So my 2 passions in life became music and tennis.
Wow.
And I guess being around creative people as at the very influential age when you're growing up, as you can be, and of course, you know, with your parents being involved too, my later years developed into the professional side as a musician.
Brilliant. Now, the War of the Worlds story, it always sounds fresh and futuristic. Yet it was written in the late 19th century by H.G. Wells and adapted for radio in the US, I believe in the early 1930s, where it caused widespread panic because the people listening believed it to be real. What drew you to this particular epic story?
Well, it's a funny thing. I'm looking back now all these years for me, which was in the mid-1970s when I was composing, arranging, producing for record artists, doing a lot of music for TV and radio shows, music and advertising. But I had a particularly rewarding working relationship, and still is a very good mate of mine, David Essex, in that I signed David to what was my fledgling record label. David wrote pretty much all of his own songs, and I started touring with him as his MD in the first couple of years of his touring career. And it was my dad, in fact, who reminded me, he said, look, you know, you're a composer. You've always said to me you want to try to find a couple of stories in your life that you feel absolutely passionate about to compose and interpret for a recording, and possibly beyond that. And he was right. So we started just generally reading books of all genre, and it was literally as I was going out the door one day to say I'm off on the road again with David, he handed me this book, H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. My memory, in fact, the only memory I had of the War of the Worlds previous to that was sort of in New York, growing up, and occasionally on daytime television, a movie called War of the Worlds, and it was set in contemporary America, an alien invasion of some sort, and that was it. That's as much as I really knew about it. I opened this book by H.G. Wells, and on one read I realized this was a Victorian tale. It set not only with an understanding of science that H.G. Wells had a tremendous grasp of, but the themes that were within it were so visionary. Yet even in the 70s, just as in today's world that we live in, they touched on themes that were totally relevant. It's the story of invasion, of a faith against another, and the loss of faith in mankind. So many things that touch us today in our everyday lives. And I thought, this is an amazing piece, and that's what hooked me.
And the original cast of performers that you used on the album, I mean, were they your first choices, or did some come and go? Or?
Well, you know, when you say when you use somebody, I was so fortunate to get people of the stature that I did that I think they were more of a godsend rather than being, I wasn't using or choosing. I was fortunate to attract them. The approach to each one, with the exception of Richard Burton, was pretty much all the same, because they were all highly successful artists in their own musical careers, even with David Essex and Julie Covington, who were two of the artists on The War of the Worlds, and I had been working with them extensively on a lot of different things. I didn't presume they would just take a call from me and say, hey, please show up and be this character on my War of the Worlds project.
Yeah.
I demoed every track so that every artist that I approached could have a good idea of what they were being asked to do, what the character was, mostly singing, but there was also acting required from all of them, which was a bit of a challenge for people like Phil Lynott, who was an amazing talent, but in fact, he thought the whole challenge of becoming this parson who loses faith in mankind and believes the Martians are the devil, these all had to be demonstrated to them. So I did all that. Richard Burton was a completely different thing because it was an acting role. And we had a script. My stepmom was a writer in her own right. She was married to my dad, and she was from Manchester and had a career in writing. And she took notes from, to this day I have the hardback edition of The War of the Worlds that I was scribbling all my notes and ideas in. And when she finished the first draft of the script, and I was composing the first draft of my score, a cast of characters emerged, and one of them was that of the journalist who had survived this Martian invasion some 6 years earlier, and he's now recounting his story of survival for his newspaper. We didn't have a very large list of those who we thought could be, fantastic journalists from our point of view, but Richard's name was at the very top of it. And easy it is to make a list. How do you actually find people of that stature? But sometimes, the rub of the green, or you just get good luck in life. And in this instance, coincidence happened. A friend of ours had just come back from New York and mentioned that he had seen Richard Burton in a play called Equus. And I thought, well, if you're doing a play, you're spending a lot of time in the theater, 8 shows a week probably. So I wrote to him, introduced myself as a composer, producer, interpreting H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. Sent him with my letter the draft of Doreen's script and said, please, would you consider being our journalist? And I sent my little care package to the stage door of the theater he was appearing at, hoping that the stage doorman would actually hand him my little package, which, coming back to the good luck, he must have done, because within 2 or 3 days of it arriving, I had a call from a man named Robert Lance, who was Richard's manager at the time. And I'll never forget the conversation. It was pretty brief, actually. He said, Richard loves the idea. Count him in, dear boy. Exactly those words. I was dumbstruck. I said, I think you better speak to my dad here. And my father got on the phone, and he spoke with Robert, and they struck a deal immediately. And Richard was on board.
Because his is the first voice you hear. And although everybody's played superb part, for Richard Burton to lead someone into the story, he's something of a perfectionist himself. It's impeccable.
Absolutely. And, it's an interesting thing, Malcolm. I had actually composed and recorded a piece of music to accompany the opening speech that Richard plays. And once we finally recorded Richard and I married the two together, I listened to it. Then I took the music away. And it was one of those moments in life where you say less is more. In this case, it was far more to have less. And I chucked out the piece of music, and that's why Richard opens the piece on his own.
He has a very musical and magical voice. Now, coming forward, of course, to the stage show, its current manifestation, when did it start? When did you first do it, actually?
Our first tour of the arenas was in 2006, in April, and this is our 4th year touring it.
Must have been an absolute huge undertaking, technically, to bring this, to visualize it from what we hear on the album.
Yes, in fact, the way that I sort of conceived the production was to think of it like a film, and I worked with a couple of people that helped me create a storyboard, and it was virtually broken down frame by frame, second by second, and each column, of which there were many columns on each page, had some discipline in it. It could have been the music, the lyrics, the lighting cues, visual ideas, and including images of what I was hoping to portray within a given sequence. It also helped me define how I wanted to interpret them from a technological point of view. the live performance side pretty much spoke for itself because I had all my original orchestrations all written down. They were handwritten scores of the day. So recreating them, I knew what the lineup was to be. So actually that unfolded rather easily from my point of view. But it was this combination of technologies that all integrated together and worked in perfect synchronization with live performance. That was the sort of trickiest bit.
Wow.
How do you synchronize so many different things that are built around technologies or physical things, but synchronize them to a split second to work with live performance of over 50 musicians and live performers on stage playing the roles?
Yeah, so has it evolved from that original tour? Is it the same cast?
It's not the same cast, although we do have two of the original members, not only from the first tour, but actually go back to the original double album, Justin Hayward and Chris Thompson.
Wow.
But all the other parts, they do tend to change from tour to tour. Even when we played 5 weeks in Australia and New Zealand, 3 of the roles were from people that were very popular down under.
Very good.
So yes, those characters tend to change from tour to tour, but every production that we've done, it's part of the excitement. I try to take the next production to another level so that there's new challenges to interpret the show. It's just sort of like opening it up. I go back to the H.G. Wells book because it's almost a bottomless pit of visual ideas and storylines that just help me open up our show.
It sounds like a living and breathing thing that's just moving along and entertaining people and evolving all the time. Who's currently in the tour? Because it is a star-studded thing. For the moment,
yeah, we've been very fortunate this year. In addition to Justin and Chris, Jason Donovan is going to play the artilleryman, which was the part David Essex played originally.
Of course, yes.
Ridian, who's probably best known for X Factor, he's going to play the part that Phil Lynott played, Parson Nathaniel.
Yes.
And his wife on stage, named Beth, is going to be played by Atomic Kitten's Liz McLarnon. So it's a really good cast. I've worked with all of them in my studio to make sure that they're happy with the way they sound and we're happy, so that by the time we then strike a deal, we're all very confident that they're perfect for the parts.
Now, our local showing of it is Thursday the 2nd of December at the Newcastle Arena. Sounds great, but I've got to ask you one question. If I don't ask you anything else, I'll probably get my head in my hands from my wife about a sound effect. And she must have looked this up last night and giggled for a while. The unscrewing of the alien ship hatch. And I believe on the radio when it was done by Orson Welles, it was a jar being unscrewed. But you had quite a different way.
Well, you're right, absolutely. It started off exactly as you've described it. The idea is that it's this giant cylinder, the top of it starts to unscrew, and I tried a few different things, including placing a microphone with a plastic seal around the microphone and put it into the toilet of the studio we were recording at. Somehow somebody told me, well, if you put a microphone in the toilet bowl of any toilet, you get this big hollow sound. And I tried, I think it was just scraping a couple of pieces of metal together. That failed completely. It went down the toilet, literally. But the way that people wound up hearing it on the album, and in fact, in this incredible surround sound system we use, it just goes all around the arenas. The actual way we produced it is 2 of my wife's finest kitchen pans that I took to the studio. My engineer first thought, well, okay, I've been pretty much bonkers on this whole production already. Why stop now? Excellent. But he got into the idea of it, and he put up 2 microphones so that I scraped these 2 kitchen pans, but because they were in stereo, you could actually feel the movement, sort of left to right and around in a circle, and he magnified the amplification right to the maximum, to the point where it would have gone into distortion if it had gotten any louder. And that's really how it was created. And part of it was that I did it in time to a bass riff that starts off the track. So I guess today it's sound design, where it's in time. It's got its own sort of feel, its groove.
It's brilliant. I can't say any more. Jeff, thank you very, very much indeed for coming to Radio Teesdale
and
speaking with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on your show.
The rest of the tour goes fantastically. Thank you very much.
Many thanks.